Good evening, everyone present here. We'll be starting with a session. Dr. Arjun, sir, you can start sharing the PPT, then we'll be starting.
Okay, thank you. So I think we can begin. So the topic given to me for this particular domain is acute coronary care. So I'll be basically covering it in two different classes. The first class, which will be taken today, would deal with the theoretical aspects of this topic. And the second class, which would be taken at a later date, would just test your knowledge on this particular topic, and we will just give you a bunch of MCQs and we'll discuss the answers to those. It is a concise topic, but often tested in both the part 1 and the part 2 exam. So it obviously covers everything to do with acute coronary syndrome, and it has certain associated topics also, which we should cover under this. Right. So let us begin. Uh, why is acute coronary care so important? We know that cardiovascular diseases are one of the leading causes of death globally. If you take ICUs in general, whether the medical, surgical ICUs, I think acute coronary syndromes comprise a large chunk of mortality in every hospital. And early management obviously reduces mortality. That is why it becomes such an important topic, not just for cardiologists, but also for us to know, because this is one of those areas where time, as they say, is golden. So the faster you act, the better results you get, right? And obviously, if you act early and you act appropriately, you can not only reduce mortality and complications, you can preserve cardiac function for that patient. So it includes a rapid assessment and timely reperfusion, this being the most important aspect of acute coronary care. And a multidisciplinary approach is important. So both timely intervention at the emergency department by the cardiologist and your critical care management. All three of these have to be combined to make sure that the patient gets treated appropriately and on time. So what is the pathophysiology of acute coronary syndrome? It is essentially caused by a reduction in blood supply to the myocardium. So myocardium, we know, is requires a large amount of oxygen every minute, and if you interrupt this flow, even for a brief period of time, it can lead to a myocardial necrosis followed by disastrous consequences. So the underlying mechanism in most of these cases is an atherosclerosis of the coronary arteries, but there are other mechanisms which I'll discuss about. So the key processes in your typical MI include a plaque formation, a plaque rupture, and a thrombus formation, which leads to a myocardial ischemia initially, and it can progress into an infarction if you don't treat it early. So the atherosclerotic plaque often ruptures, and this exposes subendothelial components, which causes a large-scale platelet activation and aggregation, which causes a formation of intracoronary thrombus, which essentially cuts off blood supply. So a partial or complete occlusion typically causes an unstable angina or an NSTEMI, and a complete occlusion causes a STEMI or an ST elevated M. So this results in an imbalance between the oxygen supply and the demand. So there is a high demand, but there is not adequate supply, and this in turn translates into myocardial injury and necrosis. So these are the types of MI, very important for all intensivists to know. By MI, we typically think of the type 1 MI, right, which is the classical MI. So here what happens is that there is an ischemia due to a primary coronary event, such as classically a plaque erosion or a rupture, or even a fissuring of the coronary arteries or an arterial dissection. However, this is obviously the most common type of MI, but this is definitely not the only one. There can be different other etiologies. So it's very important to know these. What is a type 2 MI? Probably more commonly seen in medical ICUs is the type 2 MIs, definitely more commonly seen in surgical ICUs. It is occurring because of an ischemia, which is a result of an impairment in the oxygen supply and a high oxygen demand, right? So typical example would be a patient who develops an MI in the post-op scenario. They're not necessarily having a plaque erosion. What is happening is that they're having a high myocardial demand, but your supply is not adequate. That's why they end up developing an MI. So there is certain subtle differences in the way these patients present, and also certain important implications when it comes to treatment. So that's why it becomes very important to distinguish between your type 1 and your type 2 MI. Your type 1 MI would be more commonly be an ST segment elevation MI, while your type 2 MI would more commonly be a non-ST segment elevation MI. However, this doesn't always hold. So then you have your type 3 MI, also not very uncommon, where you have a sudden unexpected cardiac death with symptoms suggestive of MI. So young person in the gym who suddenly develops chest pain and dies within 2 minutes. There is no way that you can prove that this person had an MI, but the symptoms were highly suggestive of myocardial ischemia and caused a sudden unexpected cardiac death, right? This is increasing in numbers over the last few decades and causing major alarm in society. This is also an important type of MI for us to remember. Then you have your type 4 MI, which are typically, you can remember them as the iatrogenic MI. So your MI, which is associated with either a percutaneous coronary intervention. So you take the patient to the cath lab to do a stenting, and the patient develops another MI in the cath lab because of the PCA. So that is a type 4A MI. And a type 4B MI would be a patient in whom you've put a stent, and on day 2, they again develop a stent thrombosis and then develop an MI. So these are the type 4A and 4B types of MI. Then you have your type 5 MI, so which is an MI which is associated with cardiac surgery. And also they talk about basically a type 6 MI, which can result where you can have an MI due to etiologies which are not associated with the heart, right? So if you have a sepsis and that causes an MI, then that typically falls under your type 6 MI. So I hope I'm clear in relationship to the types of MI. If you have any doubts here, you can stop me anytime and ask me. Okay, this is very, very important. Okay. So coming to how you diagnose MI, obviously your ECG remains the gold standard, and it is the most standard tool for diagnosis of suspected ACS. It is cheap, immediately available, very easy to read if you're well trained, right? So the European Society of Cardiologists recommends that ECG should be done within 10 minutes of arrival, not just to the ICU, but emergency department arrival. So ECG might have your classical ST elevation, or it might initially be completely normal, or there might just be non-specific STT changes. So if you have a high suspicion of ACS, your patient presents with a sudden chest pain, and you have that typical history, you might have a normal ECG initially, but you should always repeat ECGs in those patients, right? And in some patients in whom you have a high clinical suspicion and your ECGs are normal, always remember to repeat ECGs with right-sided or posterior leads, because you do not want to miss a right ventricular infarction or an inferior wall infarction, right? So these are the ECG criteria for ST elevation. Remember that you are looking at V2 and V3, and then you're looking at all the other leads. So in all the other leads, this is standard. So your ST segment should rise more than 1 millimeter. That is for all other leads. Now this differs between the sexes when it comes to V2 and V3. So for V2 and V3, if you look at females, your number it should be more than 1.5 millimeters, right? But for males, it depends on the age. So for males who have an age less than 40 years, it should be more than 2.5 millimeters. And for males who have an age more than 40 years, it should be 2 millimeters. So this you should remember. Okay. For all other leads, it is 1 millimeter. For all females, it is more than 1.5 millimeter. That is an ST elevation at V2 to V3. This they're talking about the J point elevation. So ST elevation or a J point elevation of more than 1.5 millimeter for females. And for males, it depends on the age. So if the age is less than 40 years, then an elevation more than 2.5 millimeter becomes significant. But if the age is less than 40 years, and if it's more than 40 years, then elevation of more than 2 millimeter becomes significant. This is something you should remember.